Hi, everybody. Welcome to Profiling Evil by Mike King and Chris McDonough. Chris, how you doing?
Hey, Mike. How are you, buddy? It's great to see you.
Doing well. Hey, we got two really favorite friends of ours online with us here today to talk about September 11, 2001. They are from the city of New York and both served in public safety. And I'm going to formally introduce you guys in just a minute, but if you just, Tommy, say hello from the New York City Police Department.
Good afternoon, everybody. Mike, Steven.
Hey, Tommy.
How are you guys?
Really good to have you here, buddy. And Steve Pollackov from FDNY. Steve, thank you so much for joining up with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, no, it's our pleasure. I mean, it's really amazing to think about. We're approaching 20 years since 9/11 next year when we look at 2021. And September 11th is coming up quickly on us. I think it's a day that the two of you will never forget. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today, folks. We want to spend some time and remind each of us of the impact that this had, not only on us as a nation, it had an impact globally. And we're going to talk about how it impacted two really amazing people that are very dear to us. As we do that, we're going to have a little fun along the way, I hope, as we talk about some pretty tough things. But we're going to talk about this city that you two love. And I don't know, do you ever not see those pictures of the Twin Towers and not just have really warm and maybe bad feelings, guys?
No, never. Every time we see it, I think I can speak for Steve. I'm sure he can. But yep, it certainly brings you right back.
After 9/11, we saw young men and young women across our country stepping up and joining the military to go out in the fight against terror. Tommy, I assume you saw that with cops, with the police department. And you two represent really these heroes that people wanted to emulate when something like that happened, and they want to protect their country. What was your thought during that time as you watched all these young people stepping up?
Yeah, I think when things finally settled out, and you started talking and meeting the kids coming out of the academy and going on patrol for the first time, every single one of them either said, I joined because of, or I was in the process, and now it just makes it so much more important. And I'm getting chills right now. Those kids were thrust into it, and they saw a counterterrorism type of environment that, the likes had never been seen before. They don't know anything about what it was before. The Joint Terrorist Task Force was a small group of dedicated investigators and individuals. It exploded to hundreds of members. It was just an entirely different way of policing.
Yeah, it's amazing. And Tommy, this is really interesting that you brought that up, because you were on the ground floor of really watching these operations kind of explode into a global in nature war on terror. And, New York City, obviously you guys took the tip of the spear, for the major agencies across the country. So we're going to unpack that about your guys' careers here. And Steve, so Mike, what do we got here about why did the Lord make firefighters, right? What are we going to talk about?
Question
here?
We've always had, haven't we, Steve? That's one I've had as long as I've known you. Let me tell you a little bit about Captain Steve Pollackov. He started his public safety career back in 1989, was serving in Battalion 46, Steve. I think I remember in Queens. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Well, actually, I started off as a volunteer firefighter here in my hometown of Limbrook. My father, who's in the picture there, has been a Limbrook fireman since 1970, joined the FDNY in 1971, and I just kind of followed my stepfather's footprints. But so I actually started, like I said, in the Limbrook Fire Department as a firefighter, and it was through them that I became an EMT, and then in 1989 went to work in the city as an EMT. And I started off in Elmhurst, Queens, and then a couple of years later went to paramedic school through the city. So that was my job function for 9 months, was to go to paramedic school. Then got assigned to Coney Island in Brooklyn South, spent almost 9 years there, about 8.5, when I got promoted to lieutenant. And from there, I got transferred up to the Bronx. And as a new lieutenant, I bounced around between 3 different stations. And I also got pulled into working in the division office for the chief there. And then, fortunate on my behalf, I kind of like working inside in the office and environment, even though I never thought I would. Took a job at FDNY headquarters, or I should say a position at FDNY headquarters. And that's where I fell into geographic information systems, doing mapping work for the department. Well, actually for the chief that I was working for specifically, I was doing stuff for him. Then an opening came up to run the GIS unit for the department, and I begged, pleaded, and got the position. And fortunately enough, it was great. I loved it and stuck with it for the remainder of my career, knowing that it would leading to a great second career. And fortunately, well, maybe unfortunate, I'm not sure, but it was through my GIS circles that I met my king. So,
well, you did some amazing work, and I remember the first time I walked into the command center at FDNY and looked at that view that you had of the entire city and every fire piece of fire apparatus and equipment and personnel. It was monumental to think of the total number of people that you were tracking and being able to oversee and manage and provide intelligence for. How many total firefighters, EMS folks in the city of New York?
Altogether, department-wide, I believe there's about 16 to 17,000. That includes firefighters, EMS, and civilian personnel as well. I'm not sure the exact breakdown. It's about 11,000 firefighters, approximately 5,000 to 6,000 EMS personnel, and about 1,000 civilian employees.
Then I have to introduce this young boy at one point, Lieutenant Tom Joyce of the New York City Police Department, who has been a friend of Chris and mine for many years. Tommy, it is so wonderful to have you here. You began your career in 1986, and the thing I was always impressed with you, and of course I love this picture that you have in black and white here, but the thing that I was always impressed with you is you loved working in the trenches. The administration kept pulling you into leadership positions, and you promoted through the ranks pretty darn quickly. In fact, that picture in the middle of you being promoted as a lieutenant, I mean, you just look like a boy there. Tell us a little bit about your career.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So like you said, I started in 1986 in the New York City Transit Police, back when there were 3 police departments in New York City. They had the New York City Housing Police, the New York City Transit Police, and then there was the NYPD. And we used to joke, it wasn't HPD or TPD, it was OPD, because everyone referred to it as, oh, the other police department. So we were considered like second rate. There was 4,000 New York City transit cops, 2,000 housing cops. But then in 1993, under the spearheading of Mayor Rudolph Giuliani and led by Commissioner Bratton, they were able to effectively merge the 3 departments. We refer to it as the hostile takeover, but they call it a merger. If that's what they want to call it, they can call it a merger. It was actually a wonderful opportunity. I enjoyed the New York City Transit Police a lot. Very good camaraderie, great culture. Some of the best cops I have ever met in my life, but it was limited. Career opportunities were limited. There just wasn't as much to do, not as much specialty units. Probably the most fun I ever had was in the New York City Transit Police when I was in the decoy squad, where we would go out with about 10 people and a supervisor, and we would do a decoy operation where there were a lot of robberies within a particular area within the subterranean city of the New York City subway. And we would focus on hotspots and then put ourselves in the position of the victim to be robbed instead of the civilians being robbed. And then almost every single time we ever were robbed and put into a decoy operation, the offender that we arrested was a massive recidivist. So it worked perfectly.
Well, guys, I want to take you back to September 11th. Now we're going to watch a video and just chat for a second.
Yeah, actually, I could fill you in on a little more detail about that. Fire chief in the white shirt in that video is Chief Pfeiffer, who was, I believe, a battalion chief at the time in Manhattan South. And as they were doing that training exercise, they heard a sound. They actually had a French film crew doing a documentary about the New York City Fire Department. That's why it was being filmed. And they heard the noise of the plane, didn't know what it was initially. And the French film crew turned the camera and got the first plane coming into the Twin Towers. That is the only film footage of the first plane striking the towers. So Chief Pfeiffer immediately, with the crew, responded over to the Trade Center, started the command post there. His brother, who was a lieutenant, I believe his first name was Kevin Pfeiffer, arrived because he also worked in Manhattan, and Chief Pfeiffer ordered him into the building, and tragically his brother, Lieutenant Pfeiffer, was killed in action during the collapse. As I mentioned earlier, I had taken a position at FDNY headquarters, and Chief Pfeiffer was my boss in operations. So I worked for Chief Pfeiffer for quite a few years. Eventually, he went on to take over, or actually started, the Center for Terrorism and Disaster Preparedness for the FDNY. So I was still assigned to operations, but still did a lot of GIS work for the center. Going back to Ray Pfeiffer, and Mike's going to talk later on about the Ray Pfeiffer Foundation. And then, Mike, you had asked where I was on that day. So as I mentioned before, I was promoted to lieutenant and assigned to the Bronx, where I kind of bounced around a little bit. And the chief that was in charge of the division, I had actually known, he was my chief down at Coney Island, had asked me to take an alternate position, filling in for another lieutenant in the division office whenever that lieutenant was on vacation or medic refresher or just needed some days off. I would work in the division. So when that first plane came in, I was working in the division that day. We had the CAD systems up on the computers, and the CAD system just started lighting up. And the CAD is the dispatch system. Yes, the computer-aided dispatch system. And all these 911 calls coming in that a plane had gone into the towers. And just like, many people that day, if not all, thought it was just a tragic accident. All the staff in the office, we were all like, itching to respond. My chief had said, no, we're not just, going to respond. Obviously, even if it was an accident, and as bad as an incident like that is, we still have 911 to take care of for the rest of the city. Tom, tell us where you were that morning and what were you doing, and what was that first response?
So it's interesting. Steve mentions that he thought it was, they thought it was the first one was an accident. We had the same exact reaction. We had started about 5 a.m, doing an early morning apprehension on a homicide suspect that we were looking for. As you guys know, Chris and Mike and Steve, you probably know, homicide perpetrators and most gang members and some of your most serious criminals, they don't really work off of their given name. They work off their street names. So we were looking for a murder suspect by the name of Powerful. So we had, what we usually do is we bring a team in together, and maybe multiple detectives, and we would maybe send 4 to one location, 4 to another location. We do those locations simultaneously, because back in the day with, landlines, they would call each other and say, hey, the cops were just here, if you're there, so we would do multiple apprehensions simultaneously at the same time. We had struck out. We hit numerous locations, couldn't find this kid Powerful, and we were calling it a day at around 8 o'clock. You know, you're working from 5 in the morning till 8 in the morning, 3 hours of apprehension attempts. If you didn't find him by 8 o'clock, the word's out by then, and you might as well shut it down, regroup, and pick it up another day. So we went to breakfast in a very famous Brooklyn diner called Tom's Diner. Allegedly, the song Suzanne Vega, Tom's Diner, but it's not. But they take claim for it anyway on Washington Avenue and 77. And we were just checking out from our breakfast. And one of the detectives, I'm not going to mention any of their names. They know who they are. I know who they are. I don't know if it's okay. But one of the detectives was standing right next to me. And he goes, "Did you hear that?" And I said, "Yeah." And we were in Brooklyn, mind you. And I would say as a crow flies, maybe a mile and a half away. And maybe less, just under a mile. So I'll figure it out.
But across the river and
then in lower Manhattan, lower Brooklyn.
Yep.
The plane go across past you guys?
Yeah, I heard that. And we said, nah, maybe a truck backfired or something like that, And we paid our bill. We got outside, and someone said, "Did you hear the plane hit the World Trade Center?" And we're like, "Wow, it's crazy." And to Steve's point, we all said, "Oh, it must have been an accident." Hey, remember in the 50s when that plane flew into the Empire State Building? And, yeah, whatever. And then we hear the other one, and we hear it go off, and we're like, wow. So we run down to 325 Clausen Avenue, which is right down the block from where we were. It's probably one of the more taller buildings in downtown Brooklyn. And we get up to the top of 325 Clausen Avenue. We can't believe what we see.
And by this point, like within a couple of seconds, that the radio's probably just cracking.
Yeah, the radio's
you can't even get in.
And you can't get a word in. You can't. And they know you're in the queue. They know you're working. So if they need you, they'll get you.
So you're running on instinct at this point, right. Almost instantly, right?
Yep. Well, I'll tell you what instinct. What I had was when we were up on the top of the roof. We were like, "Oh wow, this is, not like nothing we've ever seen." A couple of the guys wanted to go.
Right.
And this is where my previous experience kicked in. Was I was at the 93 bombing when they drove the van underneath the World Trade Center.
Yeah, you said, right?
Working in Lower Manhattan at the time, and we couldn't even get into Lower Manhattan because of all the apparatus for 10, 20, 30 blocks away. You had to hoof it in on the 93 bombing from all of Lower Manhattan. Every car stopped. So if the trains weren't running and the cars, you couldn't drive a car, you couldn't get there anyway.
Wow.
So I told my guys, I'm like, "Hey guys, there's no sense for us to go. If they know we're in the queue, if they call us, we'll go, and we'll tell them how we're going to get there and what we're going to get there and what our estimated time of arrival is." I said, "But guys, there's nothing to do and we can't get there." Mm-hmm. And lo and behold, we're sitting there and we're just standing there watching, waiting to hear, and the towers go, and the first tower goes.
Wow.
Which was actually the second one hit, actually collapsed first.
Wow.
And then at that point, we're like, "All right, let's get out of here. Everyone back to the station house, put your uniform on," because we were in soft clothes, and everyone back in uniform. And then they had us muster up, believe it or not, of all places, at Metrotech, which was the communications center. Yep. And we were mustering up there. And then like 15 or 20 minutes later, someone with a brain said, "Wait, if we're under attack here, wouldn't 9/11 communications be a target? Let's get out of here." And then we remustered somewhere else. And then for the rest of the day, we just handled all the crowds who were literally running and coming across the bridges, the Manhattan Bridge, the Brooklyn Bridge, coming out of the tunnels. And then they started running special trains. And all we really did was my team on that day, as it relates to the events at the World Trade Center, because we did other things too, I'm sure we'll talk about. But we were just working the crowds, getting them safe, getting them to some mode of transportation. And then I also dispatched detectives to the hospitals that were within our jurisdiction, because you would handle missing persons, because even though that person might have identity on them, until there's a notification to the family, they're considered a missing person. And you have to tie those investigations together. Guess what? Nobody showed up at the hospitals. You either walked away from there or you perished.
You know, I think it's important for our viewers to understand that at the moment this goes down, that you guys, your training kicks in, and while everybody's going this way, you guys are going this way.
Yeah.
And you know, that's amazing.
Yeah, let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at the second plane hitting the towers, and then talk about how do you roll out from
moments ago of the second plane hitting the World Trade Center. That is spectacular pictures. I don't know if you could see the plane, and that too was a passenger plane, if perhaps some type of navigating system or some type of electronics would have put two planes into the World Trade Center with
amazing.
Steve, did you have a visual on any of this by this point, and could you guys, either of you, actually see what was going down here from the distance that you were at? Or
No. I was up in the Bronx, which was about, I'm kind of guessing about 18 miles away.
Okay. And Tommy, how far out were you guys, your team at that point, you think?
I mean, if we had to drive through the streets and get there, it's probably a mile and a half.
Yeah, you know,
that crow flies. But
you know
if you're familiar with Lower Manhattan and the Brooklyn Bridge, we were right at the base of the Brooklyn Bridge and Manhattan Bridge, kind of where they convene.
Okay, so you know, it's fascinating because I think everybody in the world can remember where they were that very moment that it happened. If they happen to have had the TV on. You know, I remember my son calling me, you know, my oldest son, he says, "Hey, Dad, turn the TV on." And, you know, I just caught the second one, kind of like the majority, I think, of most people across the country. Mike, do you remember?
Yeah, I was teaching a class in rural Utah to police officers, and we just flipped the channel on and said, "Class is done." I mean, it was, and we were actually, I don't know if we talked about this before, Steve and Tom, we were actually preparing for the 2002 Winter Olympics at that time. And we had stood up the first true fusion center in the country as part of that preparation for 2002 in Salt Lake City. And so we actually activated the fusion center. It was the first true activation in the country of a multi-jurisdictional fusion center with the feds and everyone else as a result of that. But man, I don't think there was an eye in the world that wasn't on New York City and then into the fields in Pennsylvania and then Washington DC that day. Just so horrible. So Steve, you're now there, and they say plane number 2 has hit the towers. Now it's a different story. What are you guys doing?
No, I wasn't there. Like I said, when the second plane came in.
No, I'm sorry. I meant in the office, though. You guys are strategizing, and saying, "Hey, we're not going to go. It's an accident." But now you're realizing it isn't an accident.
Yeah, and like I said, I mean, it still took a lot of coordination. You know, we had crews that just wanted to go racing down there. And again, now as this incident's getting bigger and bigger, you know, my chief recognized, you know, hey, we can't all go racing down there. So, you know, officers got left back, EMS crews got left back. Again, we still had 911 calls throughout the city. People forget that. You know, the city still went on. So, you know, whether it be EMS, NYPD, or fire runs, you know, those were still coming into the system. It is kind of amazing, though, at least from an EMS perspective, you know, for a few days, weeks after that, you know, EMS call volume did drop, you know, compared to our normal. I'm not really sure why. I don't know if people were just more aware of what was going on and, you know, hoping not to call 911 for minor things. But Like I said, the volume did drop, but the city still had to, have normal response going on as well. And then we went down with my chief, and we were down there for, I don't even remember, 2.5 days. And it was just, chaos. And then eventually they actually brought in the military, National Guard, cordoned off areas, because now at this point, not only, do you have New York City agencies there, but now you're starting to get a rush of, people, volunteers from Long Island, volunteers from Jersey, like Tommy said, people just wanting to rush in and start helping, which was, honorable, but it just caused even more chaos. So the National Guard had fenced off areas. I think it was about 3 days later, they were issuing credentials. So you had to actually have credentials to get into the gated area to work. And then EMS, FDNY in general, put everybody on a schedule. So again, so we didn't have everybody down there at once, having people, again, answering regular 911 calls as well. And my chief had decided whenever he was down there, which was at that point every other day, he wanted his staff down there. So I had gotten onto a schedule with my chief. So again, once my chief went every other day, me and the rest of the staff was there with him working.
So let me ask you guys something. As the towers fall, did either of you see that? And clearly you would have seen the plume that was created after that. But I'm going to just let this play for a second while we're talking to remind people how absolutely terrifying this must have been for everyone involved. I mean, you watch this you think about when we were kids watching The Blob on TV. This is real life stuff happening here.
Again, it was just chaos. It was just chaos. People running away, people running in, again, not knowing what was going to happen. Fortunately enough, at that point, I believe 7 World Trade Center was pretty much evacuated. One of the things that did was a big lesson learned was New York City Office of Emergency Management, OEM, was based in 7 World Trade Center. And back then they had everything in that building. Mayor Giuliani actually wanted them, that agency in that building as like a high profile, I can't think of the word I'm looking for, but in a high profile area, he wanted OEM.
I've seen the best and the worst of people at those as a result of the World Trade Center and its aftermath.
I want to add to that too a little, Mike. It was also the fact that you didn't know who made it. Not only, the brothers on the job, but, my brother worked at the New York Stock Exchange. I didn't know where he was, if he got out, was dead. My father, cell communications was not workable at that point. So like I said, it was, and then also on the job, we were getting reports of, this person had perished, this person had perished, and then it turned out they didn't. In other cases, there was people that you didn't know about that did perish. So like I said, there was a lot of mixed communication. And then, like I said, the fact that, you had friends and family that could be in the area and you didn't know what happened to them at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let me just add to that. I remember the teletype coming out of the 23 New York City cops who were listed. They were listed as missing, not deceased, for a while. And then until they reached a certain point, and then until their remains were recovered, did they actually call them, deceased. So yeah, and there was the unknown, and then to Steve's point was, who hadn't you reached out to yet? Who hadn't you talked to? Who hasn't been heard from? Where are they? What are they doing? I mean, we went days. A lot of people went days without talking to people and not knowing what their situations were.
Yeah, and they had down. It was like, I'm trying to remember exactly, but I think it was like a big wooden pallet and people were coming down, putting up missing signs, with their loved ones, pictures on there, because like I said, you didn't know if somebody was there or not there, alive, perished. You had no clue. And matter of fact, I saw, I can't think of his name at the time or right now, but a police officer that I knew from my Coney Island days down at the 6-1 precinct. And, they couldn't find his brother. And he had come down and put up one of these missing signs. It's like Tommy said, nobody knew. They were just missing at that point. You didn't know if they were alive or dead, or even possibly got out of the area. But like I said, you couldn't get a hold of them. As I said, cell phones were down. You couldn't even call anybody.
And then the stories picked up in the aftermath as well of people who were supposed to be there that for some reason didn't go and didn't get on a plane because they missed their alarm didn't go off in the morning and didn't make it. And then how many stories of people like, well, my husband went missing and I haven't heard from him in 2 days, but he wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the World Trade Center. But he just, he detoured and, did something different out of the ordinary that one day. I myself was standing at the base of the World Trade Center the very day before. And I was still working in Brooklyn. And I had said to myself the day before, God, I love Manhattan, the energy of this city. I have to finish my career working in Manhattan one more time.
Wow.
The very next day. So, I mean, I was at an internal meeting, and it was like, that could have been the day before, and it could have been the day after. And a really good friend of mine, another lieutenant, his car was late to come pick him up to bring him to the same building that I was in the day before. Because there's a lot of internal meetings that we would have to run to. So, as a lieutenant, you would call a sector car, a squad car, and say, hey, pick me up and drive me over here. Take me off. They chauffeur you over. They pick you up and drop me off. This car was late because they got stuck on a 911 call. He's getting mad. Where are you? Where are you? I got to get you. It saved his life. So
it's crazy.
There's hundreds of stories like that goes both ways.
Mike and I have a saying that the universe is on schedule. And, just that point alone, I mean, even on the civilian side, I mean, I know a kid whose mom is a flight attendant, and she was in Boston, and she was on standby for Flight 11. Mm-hmm. And her husband called her and got the kid and said, let me talk to mom. And his name is Dan Larson. If you're listening, I'm telling your story, forgive me. Anyway, his mom gets on the phone and her husband says, hey, I don't know why, don't get on that flight. And she took a pass on Flight 11. Wow. So, and that's where I was going. That's what my question was going to be, it's what was going through everybody's mind, knowing that your friends, all these guys and gals that you've known for your careers, you've run into burning buildings together, Stevie, Tommy, you've run into, kicked doors together, done hits together on houses and stuff. And, now this is like a crazy scenario that's going down. And I think you answered it, Steve, where, you're processing not only my brother, and I think people forget that, we're all human. Cops, firefighters, we're trained to get in and take care of business, but we have families. And we also, know that everybody else that we work with has families. And, so you had to process all of that information as well. So crazy stuff. Interesting.
So was there a feeling amongst your peers? We see this behavior in other major tragedies of why this person and not me that dies. Was there heartache and feeling that way?
Yeah, the survivor's guilt, I think, was massive. Everyone felt like, why wasn't I there to be with them? And I wish I could have traded, when you had really close friends. Of the 23 that passed away that day on the NYPD, the 343 firemen, Um, I worked very closely with 5 of those 23. I had personal friends in the fire department, the Port Authority cops, but everyone had some kind of story where they had a really close friend who passed away. Paris didn't come, and then we all felt the same exact thing. I would have traded places with him. I wish it was me. I wish I was at least there with him or her. It was massive, and I never felt anything close to that ever. And then until a couple of years ago, Wenjin Liu and Ramos were assassinated in Brooklyn.
Yeah, they're sitting in their cars, right?
They were sitting in the car in the 79th precinct on a corner of Tompkins and Myrtle, which I probably stood at that corner 1,000 times. And we did apprehension attempts at 99 Tompkins and 77 Tompkins hundreds and hundreds of times. And they got killed right in front of that. Like, I've had survivor's guilt on that one. We all felt really bad on that. I called some of my old colleagues who were still there, and we're like, man, how many times we stood on that same exact street corner. And we felt that it was not even close to what we felt at 9/11.
Interesting.
Yeah, the survivor's guilt on that one was massive, and I bet you it still bothers a lot of people today.
Interesting.
And then, Chris, you had mentioned mindset, which is very true. But after I don't remember exactly when they started, but not only were the guys working down at the Trade Center barely getting any sleep, but then you also have to remember a lot of times, you'd be getting off shift to get home, take a shower, and then you were attending a memorial service or a wake.
Yeah, good point,
for the guys that were killed. And I also found it surreal, unimaginable, but a lot of these funerals, there was no body because they hadn't even found the bodies. Maybe they found a body part, equipment, a helmet. So here you have a casket with a helmet in it, and like I said, no physical body. But like I said, people forget, the guys were putting the time in that at the Trade Center, but this is what they were doing on their off time as well. So it's like you almost like couldn't even get out of it, even for a little while.
There were 3 assignments. You either were down at Ground Zero as part of the rescue recovery operation, or you were at the Fresh Kills landfill that was activated in Staten Island. That had been a landfill in Staten Island that had previously been shut down and closed. Just to give you an idea how big it was, I believe that's the only landfill in the United States that's visible from the moon, or some crazy little factoid on that. That's how big that landfill is. Anyway, so they had closed it. They reactivated it to start handling all the debris that was transferred from the World Trade Center. And then you could have worked in the office of the chief medical examiner's office at the morgue. And so my detective squad, I was the lieutenant. I had 3 sergeants and about 35 detectives that worked for us in the 79th. Every single day we were sending somebody to each of those 3 different locations. Wow. And every detective squad in the city was doing the same exact thing. So you had people assigned to the morgue, and their job was to process any human remains. And although I was never there for it, when a fireman or a police officer showed up, but the guys told me that when they got news that a cop was coming in or a fireman was coming in, like everything just stopped. And like it was quiet and somber, and they processed it. With the same level of work, they would process the human remains coming in, but nobody said a word, and they just did their job.
And I want to take Steve to Ground Zero because Steve ended up there on a lot of days. Steve, why don't you just maybe share Ground Zero and maybe share what to you was one of the worst days you had at Ground Zero?
Well, I think the worst day was the first day going down there and just trying to wrap your head around what had actually happened. Like I mentioned before, just seeing people that couldn't find their family members. There was so many people down there to help, but a lot of people didn't even know how to help. You can't even imagine all walks of life that came down there to try to help. Like I said, from a uniform personnel, from civilians, priests. I always remember I was walking down Chambers Street, and a priest walked by me, and he didn't even say a word to me, and he just put his hand on my shoulder, just so I knew he was there, and that's what he was doing, not just to me, to everybody, just to know that he was there, and it was. Like I said, the response that came in was just absolutely amazing. First responders from not only all over the country, but from all over the world. I met a paramedic from Australia down there that, just like COVID going on today, how these nurses and medics are going to other parts of the country to help out. That's what was happening down there as well. And then even, as I mentioned, I took a job at headquarters. OEM, had moved into a new building in Brooklyn, and I don't know why, but they had like a section of a building right on the other side of West Street, and where they had offices. And I had gone down there for a meeting, and I don't even know if they knew, but I had walked into this building and figured out what meeting room that this was located. And when I walked down into this meeting room, I quickly realized that this was the area, including the meeting room, that was the initial morgue for, the attacks. And I just immediately walked out, and I just didn't want to be in there. And I had spent enough time in there, seeing people that had perished. I wasn't going to sit there at a meeting. And like I said, I'm sure people that didn't even know, but I knew, and I wasn't going to stay there.
Yeah, you lost how many firefighters on that day?
FDNY lost 343 members that day, and then tragically, which people probably don't even realize, that people are still dying to this day from 9/11 illness. And most recently, FDNY just lost their 200th member from September 11th illnesses. And then there's plenty that are still sick, including my father.
Yeah.
And it's mostly cancer, right, Steve?
From a lot of it's cancer.
Yeah.
But it's kind of odd. My father retired in 1999, and his stepfather retired in 1999, and he was down with the FDNY with what's called the Disaster Area Response Team, or DART. Okay. And he was a member of the DART team when he was still an active member, and continued as a volunteer. And it was kind of odd because he was actually more on like the outer limits of Ground Zero, and what they were doing with the DART team was actually helping guys get back to their firehouse or their EMS station when they got off shift, because they'd be busting us in. They didn't want personal cars down there, so he was helping get people back so they could get their cars and go home for a little while. He wasn't down at the pit much. He was a little bit, but and then it turned out he got sick, and I was down there 10 times more than he was, and I didn't get sick. They started seeing lesions on his lungs that were growing rapidly. They actually thought he had cancer. They did biopsies, and it actually turned out he didn't have cancer. They didn't know what he had. He had they call it the 9/11 cough. He still has it till this day. Wound up seeing some specialists to try to figure out what was going on with him. He actually has pigeon disease. Pigeons carry about 60 different diseases, and they figured he inhaled pigeon dust. from disintegrated pigeons.
Never heard of that. That's
yeah.
interesting.
It's amazing.
So these lesions were building from the pigeon disease.
Yeah, that's terrible. I want to kind of switch gears and move out to fresh kills, Tom, and talk about your experiences out there.
Yeah, sure. So the very first day that they opened up the Fresh Kills landfill, I drew that straw. Got sent out there, and essentially what they did was they assembled teams, and the team consisted of one lieutenant, 3 sergeants, 30 detectives, so it'd be 3 teams of 10 plus the sergeant, and then they would assign an FBI agent, and then they would assign a heavy equipment operator working one of those bulldozers or backhoes or whatever. And they would point over to a big giant pile of rubble, which was probably a couple stories high. And they said, your job is to move that pile of rubble from point A to point B and to go through every minuscule item, the most minute item, and move it from there to there, because we're looking for human remains. We're looking for pieces of the aircraft. We're looking for the black boxes, and we're looking for anything that could further this investigation or help somebody be identified. So a driver's license, some sort of form of ID, anything from somebody's desk or anything that might help. And that's just what it was. And the very first day was really crude. It wasn't really set up. There were no real logistics. There was no equipment. We showed up. They gave us a hard hat, gloves, a rake. They told you to wear work boots, and you were out there. Eventually, it was very, very process driven. They had conveyor belts, they had machines and equipment. The FBI, they did a phenomenal job. The feds, the NTSB, all the people, all who was involved. By the time they were a couple of months into it, they had a really efficient operation. They had refrigerator trucks. They had temporary morgue set up. It was really for the scope of the project and the importance of the project, it was an incredible thing to see a couple of months later. But that first day was, to Steve's point when he said it was just chaos and nobody knew what to do and how to handle it. And then you could tell who was leading and who, just said, well, listen, something's got to get done, so let's just get to work and we'll figure it out as we go. But we know what we have to do, and what we have to do is find people, the human remains, and we have to find stuff aircraft related. So let's look and start digging and do what you need to do. The smell, that acrid smell, was terrible. Whether it be at Ground Zero or at the Fresh Kills landfill, you could smell it. It was the same thing. You could feel it in your air. You could feel it breathing. We were promised it was safe. It wasn't.
Jeez.
It wasn't safe. They proved that over and over again. That's why the cancers and the respiratory related illnesses are all being compensated and all the healthcare is being taken care of. But they told us for weeks and weeks, if not months, that it was safe to go in there. And people were going in there with no breathing devices, no respirators, anything. I also know that they would have worn them anyway. I know for a fact that the firemen, the workers, the steel workers, the cops, the EMTs, everybody, if they said the air's not safe, but this is what we got to do, we'd rather you don't go in, they'd still go in anyway.
Yeah.
I'm absolutely sure. No one was going to be told they couldn't go in and help recover.
Captain Pollackov, how did 9/11 change you?
How did it change me? That's a good question. I'd like to say that it changed me for the good and the bad. Again, we all knew terrorism went on in this world, but to have it hit home like this was just totally mind-boggling. And I still don't know how you guys in law enforcement do it, but when you start plugging these pieces together and start figuring out, what happened leading up to, I just found it absolutely sickening, watching these guys, these terrorists, here on U.S. soil, walking through the airport, walking through the metal detectors, like looking like businessmen, just going on a business trip. I again, till this day, I just can't even wrap my head around how somebody could think like that and to do something like this. You know, when you see bombings at a U.S. embassy overseas or other terrorist-related acts, I'm not saying they're not tragic, but like I said, I don't personally think of them what it's like to live it, I guess.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Lieutenant Tom Joyce, how did 9/11 change you?
So good and bad, just like Steve said. The good is it confirmed what I knew about first responders. They're certainly not getting wealthy off of their pay and their compensation. But even when some folks and some critics say, well, that's a sweet deal, they get a salary and a pension, you don't get paid for what you do every day. You get paid for what you might have to do one day. And I think we really saw it as bad as it could ever be on that day. And that confirmed it. And something that I always knew, like I said, we would go in regardless of what warnings they told us. And I know that we would do it again now today, which is kind of disappointing with the current landscape right now, because I think cops are taking a bad rap. We're the most restrained police in the world. We're the most professional police in the world. We would do all of these things. And I just know that first responders are the salt of the earth, and they're I am biased, but they're my favorite kind of people. And for years, I used to see the decals on the windows or the bumper stickers that said 9/11, never forget, 9/11, never forget. And I felt over time, years and years, it was just a little less memory about it, a little less memory about it. And it really kind of concerned me. I was like, we really don't want or need another event to remind people, do we? And you know, they canceled, because of COVID, they canceled the light show in New York City for the remembrance on 9/11 this year, where they beamed the two beams. And it was 30 workers that they said they needed to set up the 9/11 beams, those two beams. Now, thankfully, cooler heads prevailed and someone stepped in and said, we're going to have it again. But they came really close to canceling the remembrance for this year. Please, let's not forget. And then it took me until it was 2015 before I went back to the World Trade Center. And I went after dinner. I had a New York City dinner. Everyone went back to their respective hotels or whatever it was. And I was down in Lower Manhattan. I said, you know, I'm going to walk by the memorial. And then I saw a cop. He was standing at the ready. And I said, you know, I showed him my shield and my ID card, and I told him I was there. And he walked me in, so I was in by myself. And I just walked it myself, which was the way I didn't plan it that way. I'm glad I did it the way I did it.
One of the things I'd like to just kind of remind everybody, and if you guys would talk to this for a moment, about how that memorial is holy ground. Okay, it's holy ground.
You hit the point, Chris, really well, is that it's a memorial and it's not a tourist attraction. Yes, the tourists come and they visit it. I don't get too uptight over a lot of things. Like, I don't do the boycott thing or any of that thing. Oh, I don't agree with that, so I'm boycotting. I don't get hung up in any of that stuff, right? Because if you're really going to hold a hard line on things, you really need to go deep if you're going to hold a hard line on things, right? But what I will say is, if they take pictures there and they stand with their group, at least do it respectfully. I've seen people climb up on the stones and on the lands, and they're, you know, there's a way to take a picture as, you know, if you're from somewhere in middle America or West Coast or from some other country and you come and you want to document that you were there, taking pictures are fine, but it's the disrespect of the grounds.
Well, I kind of ditto what Tommy said, and you know, it's a weird location that it's like you said, Chris. It's a memorial. It's not a tourist spot, but we do want tourists to go there and see it. You know, that's why there's a museum there. Like Tommy said, definitely be respectful because it is holy ground. But you know, I think it's a good place for, you know, tourists to go there, and like Tommy mentioned before, not to forget what happened that day. So I say welcome. You know, come down, be respectful, pay your respects to the people that gave it all down there.
We want to thank Lieutenant Tom Joyce of the New York City Police Department, Captain Steve Pollackov from Fire Department New York, how much we appreciate what you've done and the way in which you've represented your many brothers and sisters, especially those who perished on 9/11. And to all of you folks, thanks so much for supporting us always. Good night.